And now, please welcome to the bridge, Head of Data Plumbing, Moody's Scott DeMoss.
Pretty epic intro music. I feel more regal than I have in my entire 50 years of life. All right, well, welcome to CriblCon. My name's Scott DeMoss. As they said, I have the privilege of leading our cybersecurity data management team at Moody's. Our internal customers range from cybersecurity, who's customer number one, to a bunch of app users, controls, compliance, auditors, you name it, right? Generally, we all get along, and it's pretty fun. Okay, rough agenda for today. I'm going to apologize in advance. My application to the regulatory board for liquor licenses was adamantly rejected, so I have no free beer, but I'm sure there'll be plenty out there later today. And just a reminder, if you want any more detail, have any questions on anything we cover here today, come and find me. This is a beginner-friendly session, really committed to try to give back to the community and get everybody off moving in the right direction. All right, so just going to rehash a lot of the themes you heard in the keynote, right? And these aren't new challenges, right? So data doesn't let up, more demand than ever for this data. Analyzing that data, moving that data around your network oftentimes feels like an Olympic sport these days. Storage, at least for us, storage of that data is now a whole new budgetary line item category that I get to fight with the finance people about, right? And then, obviously, as we saw in the keynote, this AI economy, what's it built on? What does it eat? What fuels it? It's more data. So this talk is really about just putting another arrow in your quiver, right? Giving you a little help. You're going to show us another option for maybe doing things, right? So the idea is simple. What if we had a way to reduce the volume, still use the data the same, get all the same predictable answers, but we could do it a little, or as you'll see later, a hell of a lot faster, and with a dramatically reduced storage footprint. Sound promising, right? All right, a little bit of something for everybody, so hopefully we can make some people happy. All right, so allow me to introduce you to metrics. Show of hands, any of you using the metrics data type outside of the observability space? All right, good job, Cribl. We nailed the audience and attendance demographic. This is good. All right, so we're just going to spend the rest of this time talking about what metrics are, kind of how it works, how it's a little bit different data structure than your traditional logs. As Clint so astutely pointed out, the logs era, they're not invaluable anymore, but their primary use cases are dwindling and not really going to be a star supporting cast in what we're trying to get done. So then we're going to end with showing you how to do this in Cribl Stream, and huge spoiler alert, it's really easy. All right, so let's start with what even is a metric, right? In its simplest form, a metric is just a point-in-time measurement of something that we care about, right? It's an observation of a thing, we give it a timestamp, we record the observed value, and we add some additional relevant details, right? Doesn't sound too terribly different than a log. What you'll see later, and really the key difference here, is that metrics data type in your analytics platform is going to be stored a little bit differently. It's going to take advantage of computer science concepts. Candidly, I don't fully understand and maybe don't need to, right? I just know it's fast and small, right? If we think about metrics in the real world, patients in hospitals are managed with metrics, right? You get admitted, you get hooked up to things, you've got temperature, you've got heart rate, respiratory rate, IV fluid intake rates. Hopefully, you drive your car using metrics, right? Speedometer for velocity, tachyometer for RPMs, fuel level, engine temp, oil levels, you get the idea, right? So the key point here is that metrics are instantaneous. Metrics are frequent, right? You're going to just kind of constantly emit them. And it turns out, like I said, they have these additional properties that we're going to exploit to great effect. All right, so there's a lot on this slide to kind of digest, so I'm going to try to distill this down into two key points in the context of a 747 jet, right? So firstly, Metrics are like the gauges and dials in that cockpit, right? They're going to provide instantaneous feedback to us as we're flying the aircraft on important things we need to know about, like altitude and airspeed and this thing called attitude. Logs are going to be like that data flight recorder that's embedded in that airplane. They provide some context and a bunch of richer detail about conditions that might be impacting the plane, right? We have a pretty passionate conversation internally with the non-cyber users about metrics versus logs. They want to just dump everything in logs and let's go, let's go, let's go. And I counter with using logs to monitor your app or service is a little bit like flying that 747 using only that data recorder device, right? Instead of those cockpit instruments and gauges. That data recorder stuff, it's difficult to see, it's inherently latent, and it turns out it may not be available to you under certain and serious conditions, right? So while metrics have long been the domain of APM platforms and telemetry teams and observability practitioners, there's a whole Gartner space on that you can go read about. Turns out with a little bit of creative thinking, we can blur these use case boundaries pretty well to some incredible effect. All right, so everybody should know what this is. This is a log, right? Nothing exotic here. We have a timestamp. We've got a text format that really could be anything. If you're like me, I have some preferences. I've been doing this 8 to 10 years, somewhere in there. I have some real strong feelings about logs and what good logs are and bad logs are. But the point is, we have Cribl Stream. We don't really have to care, right? It's one of the core Cribl superpowers. Most analytics tools, the ones you know and love, the ones we use, and full disclosure, we're big consumers of that Cisco analytics platform. I'm gonna try to do the solid thing and not call it out by name. Well, they make use of fields, right? We use fields to query that data. Fields are the filters that we're going to use to query and aggregate log data. And then this is a metric, right? Now, this is a metric represented inside a Cribl stream, right? So let's just remember, not forget, metrics are just point-in-time measures of something we care about, right? Now, it turns out that metrics, like I said, they are a little different. They got this unique storage and writing structure, so that they end up being a lot more dense, a lot more expedient to search. And again, they're using this kind of computer science algorithms and storage optimization, right? So they have a few elements to them that are pretty intuitive. You'll see a timestamp, right? When we took the measure, a metric name. Typically, that's just the name of the thing we measured, and then the value, whatever that reading was, right? They also deploy something else called dimensions. Dimensions are attributes, effectively, about that thing that we measured, right? So, for example, I measure a CPU at 7 a.m. and it's 63%. Okay, great. Nothing exotic there. Now, it might be also good when I have 1,000 metrics or 1,000,000 metrics, or in our case, 300 billion metrics over the course of a month. We need something else to better qualify an individual measure. So going back to my CPU reference, we might want to know the host name, right? Which host is this? We might want to know, is this dev or prod? We might want to know, is this US West 2 in AWS? Or is it even Azure, right? And on and on and on. So we said that fields are the filters we use to search and analyze logs. Well, the analogous thing in metrics is dimensions, right? Dimensions are those filters we're going to use to query and aggregate our metric data. And so this next sentence is kind of like the subtle magic here. There's nothing hand-wavy about what we're doing here, but this is important, so I'm going to slow down and kind of really hammer this home, right? So when we do the logs to metrics conversion, the fields of interest from the logs, the things we usually use to filter our data, those become the dimensions that we're going to create for our metrics, right? And at the end of the day, Cribl makes this so easy. So if you just remember, the fields you care about become the dimensions you'll use in your metrics data, you're good to go. All right, so what's the value? Why should you consider this? But I'm a bottom line up front guy. I want to know what I'm going to get out of something before we invest the effort. If your team is like mine, it's relatively static in size, and AI is promising that we're not going to get additional headcount anytime soon. So these numbers are from our environment. Terms and conditions apply. Your mileage may vary. Past prediction or past performance not indicative of future performance, right? But the benefits boil down to a few things. One is size, right? Storage is cheap, but it still isn't free. For users, for data managers like me, the real win here is probably related to retention. This dramatically smaller footprint means we can keep more data on hand, readily available inside of our analytics platform. I love Cribl Replay. I love Cribl Search and Send. We use it all day, every day. But sometimes people just want what they want. They want to search it how they search it. And if I don't have to fulfill another replay request, it's just one less thing the team needs to get done in a day. Secondly is speed. Fast is your friend. There's an old sports adage, speed never has a bad day, right? That grumpy user who's having trouble finding the data or the records they need to find when they run a query, he becomes an irate user when he has to wait 5 minutes instead of 1 minute to learn that he wrote a really shitty query. So the final thing here on speed is just with consumption pricing being the norm in analytics platforms, it does mean a faster search is going to be a cheaper search. And then finally, volume of beer. The irony here is that training for an athletic event, and I haven't had anything to drink in like 6 months, but people love this, okay? This will build your brand. It's innovative. It's going to be very well received. All right, so what do we convert? Well, these are some guidelines and considerations. I typically just advise you to get familiar with what your people are searching the most frequently. Look at the query logs if you have access to them. If you're seeing a lot of stats or time charts or summarize, those are really metrics use cases in disguise, right? Because we're doing aggregation and we're throwing away the rest of this stuff. So that would be my biggest piece of guidance. Okay. So how do we do it, right? At this point, we're going to click through some slides and show you what this looks like in Cribl Stream. Oh, we go back to, well, that was the spoiler alert, but anyway, okay, sorry. Okay, so we begin our transformation from logs to metrics in Cribl Stream's routes. Yeah, okay, good. We've got a couple of routes here per log type. We're going to emphasize the threat logs for the purpose of this conversation. So that's the bottom two routes. If you're new to the platform, I just want to point out a couple of things, right? So the route that we create for the log data type needs to come before the route that we're going to use to output our metrics, right? And if you think about this, it makes sense. We're receiving the logs. We receive them in stream via syslog in our case. And we're going to fabricate those metrics. Second thing to note is that the route entry for the log data type isn't final, right? So you see the little icon on line 1 and line 3 and those subgroups there. What that means is we're going to process that event with the first route. It's going to do what it does, send it out to the destination, and then that event's going to just carry on to the next route, right? So we're going to just treat the same event twice. And this is great because we get all the things we want and none of the things we don't. All right. So we jump into the pipelines. Oh, sorry. There we go. All right. We jump into the pipelines here, right? Don't get scared. Like, I don't know, 2 years ago when we started doing this, it seemed like a lot. It's 9 steps. None of them is particularly complicated. We'll touch on each one of them. I did want to point out step 2 there. That's the sampling step. It's intentionally off for the purposes of our conversation here, but I pointed out because you might use that when you're first onboarding these metrics. Maybe you don't want to open up the full stream, so you could process every 1,000th event or something like that, right? Another key feature. All right, so we dig into this pipeline, right? This one's dedicated towards pan threat metrics. We start with a drop function, and all this says is, if the source type of the incoming event doesn't match what I have here, it just goes away. We're not going to process it. It's actually a little redundant because we had that as the filter on the route side of things. I used to work with this guy. He had a long, distinguished career in special forces, and his thing was 2 is 1, 1 is none, cybersecurity, resilience, defense in depth. You get the idea, right? Same concept here. All right, so steps 3 and 4. 3, we're going to use the parser function, right? And this is a bread and butter Cribl stream function. So we're going to take our CSV record that we saw there, just the pan threat logs, and we're going to extract all the fields out of there. I did want to call out attention to the library section there. If you're using unmodified pan logs coming right off the device and your team didn't change anything on those devices, that little library drop down there is available to everybody. Just click it and use it, right? And it's going to populate the 20 or so fields down there for you. If you're anti the theme of vanilla gorilla and you got some special bespoke log format or structure, you will need to get those fields in there. You can type them in, just make sure they're in the right order. Okay, so we apply that transformation, if you will, right, against our sample data. And as you know, we can see it kind of in real time as we work against that sample. You'll see we successfully extracted all those fields, and those will be available for us to use further down. Okay. So this next step, all we're doing here is a little bit of a lookup thing, right? And strictly speaking, this isn't necessary. You won't use this on every use case. In this case, we're going to pass in the vendor action field. And if you look at the output fields, we're going to update the value for that action field. And all this is, at least for us, is really about normalizing the field values, right? We want to sell these metrics. They're cool. You're going to see how freaking fast they are. Make it easy for people to use. If they're used to searching and filtering for activity on the action of allowed or blocked, let's make sure we normalize the data against that. All right, step 6. Things get a little interesting here. This is probably the scariest function in here. It's not scary, it just has the most things that you would populate, right? All we're doing here is statistical aggregations. I call your attention to the time window. Right? Here it's 15 seconds. This is just literally the amount of clock time over which we're going to aggregate the fields that we have listed under the aggregates. So if you look at the top field there, it's count. So literally start the clock. We count the number of events we receive in 15 seconds. At the end, we populate that value in the count field. And then we're going to do some more for source user and some of those other fields. And then those group by fields are just the how we want to kind of uniquely identify our aggregations, right? So we're splitting it by source, IP, port, dest IP, so on and so forth, okay? This is almost a little bit like if you're a Splunk user, event stats, only we're doing it in line, right? On the right, when you apply that function, you can see we've already kind of refabricated an event. It's pretty concise, a little lighter weight. I'd say it's looking better already. So step 7 and 8, another trip to the data cosmetic surgeon, nothing fancy. Step 7, if you're sending it to Splunk, we put this in here so that you overtly and very clearly indicate where this is going, which index, right? Again, if you're not sending to Splunk, you might have to do something else. I do want to point it out, if you haven't used metrics in Splunk, it's a different, unique index data type, right? So when you create the index, you need to distinctly select this is a metrics index. If you got some extra time on your hand, send metrics to an event index. That's kind of funny. Step 8, this is another kind of user benefit feature here that we're doing. The URL field in these events typically is very long and onerous and includes all these different parameters and arguments, right? And it can be very long. You look at how people search the data. Generally, it's like, hey, I need to find block traffic from this user to this domain. So all we're doing is a little regex. We're going to chop off most of the URL garbage and just keep the website or domain value. And then finally, this is it, last step, where we publish the metrics. If you're like me, you're like, finally, some freaking metrics. I thought this was supposed to be fast, and we're 20-odd minutes in. Really, all we've done up until now is lay the groundwork for making sure that this function works as intended, right? That publish metrics function does all the work, okay? The cool thing is if your data destination is Datadog, if it's Grafana, if it's Splunk, if it's Prometheus, whatever it is, Cribl's already done the hard stuff for us in the destination. I don't need to know that the name of my metric needs to fit some obscure arcane specification. I will counsel you, as we look at that add metrics section there, give some thought to how you want to name it. In your analytics platform, typically there's going to be this concept of a metrics namespace, right? So if we created 4 different metrics for firewalls, hypothetically, we would want them all to start with firewall, and that's going to give you a better experience in your UI, regardless of which platform, okay? And so that's it. At this point, we've got metrics. They're going to the destination. We apply it to our sample data. And Cribl has this amazing new metrics preview pane where we're going to get some details and insights about what's coming out of our sample data, right? So my favorite part is the dimensions part over there. As you go through your pipeline development, this is incredibly useful for making sure those fields of interest are correctly translating to dimensions in your metrics. And then on the right, you can click the little M button, get a more traditional view. The cyan values, that's light blue. If you're like me and didn't have any formal arts training, the light blue value is the measure for your metric. The purple fields are the dimensions. Okay, so let's see this in action. Just to set the stage here, we're going to have 2 searches up here. We're going to search logs in my platform on the left. We're going to search metrics on the right. Same time range being searched. The search is just looking for the data, specific allowed events by my user for a 4-hour time period. And we click go. And what the hell happens? Okay, boom, 7 seconds. Pretty good, right? Spoiler alert, this is going to be a while. Fortunately, he was able to kind of time-lapse it because we're going to be up here a long time. Still going, almost there. All right, so we got an answer, right? And it's not even bad for 4 hours of data, right? Again, considering we have 120-ish terabytes of data like this for 60 days of data, or 60 days of time. But hopefully this is compelling, right? If nothing else, you just saw that. That's real, no magic. Go Chiefs, if you picked up on that. So just give it a try. You literally have nothing to lose. In our case, again, it was a 2% hit on storage to do this experiment. Best practice, we're going to close out with just some final best practices. This is, it's common data engineering stuff. Start small, right? You might have 5 metrics in a log file. Pick one of them. Pick one log source. Collaborate. Talk to your users. Talk to the business people. Look at the data that you have at hand and kind of pick some high-value targets. Don't pick that log file that only you use or only you and your teammates use, right? It needs broad value. And then finally, don't discard all the logs, right? With Cribl, obviously, we don't have to make that choice. As we saw back in the routes, we can process logs and send them one place. We can process those logs into metrics and send them another place. So hopefully you got something out of this. That's all I had. Hit me up if you have any questions. It's something that's really been transformative for our users, and hopefully you'll get some value out of it too.